Today, we're cutting through all the noise. We're diving straight into the source material to answer one big question. Exactly why did the Jantar Mantar protests grow so fast? We're mapping out how a completely standard sit-in snowballed into, well, absolute chaos. To do this, we're going to look at it like a giant pressure cooker. We'll break down the precise mechanics of how the tension was built, how it was contained, and how it ultimately exploded. Let's get right into it. Okay, so what actually turned a peaceful sit-in into a massive clash? To understand this escalation, we'll trace the timeline through 5 specific phases: the hunger strike, the midnight operation, the smuggled note, the massive NEET student wave, and finally, the explosion. Phase 1, the hunger strike spark. So the initial heat under our pressure cooker, that began on June 28th. That's when the award-winning activist Sonam Wangchuk joined the ongoing protest and kicked off a hunger strike. Now, this single action, it fundamentally changed the entire dynamic. It created a massive, and I mean massive, political dilemma for the government, with literally no easy off-ramp. Think about it. If they did nothing and his health failed, that's a severe PR disaster, an award-winning figure dying right in the nation's capital. But if they sent in the police to forcefully evict a peaceful 60-year-old man, the public backlash would be totally unmanageable. And of course, if they just caved to the demands or offered high-level resignations, well, that would project major political weakness to the opposition. The heat was completely trapped here, and some kind of action had to be taken. Which brings us to Phase 2, a midnight police operation. Realizing the situation was completely untenable, the state placed a firm clamp on our pressure cooker, and the tension escalated almost hourly. Look at this timeline. On July 15th, an unaffiliated firm files a private interest litigation asking for medical intervention for Wangchuk. The very next day, July 16th, the court formally orders a medical check. Boom. By July 17th, the sitting police commissioner is suddenly replaced by an officer with a deep background in the Intelligence Bureau. And then, just hours later, at 3 a.m. on July 18th, local police units are secretly gathered. The sheer speed of the state machinery moving in response to this pressure, it's honestly extraordinary. The plan they came up with was this highly coordinated, military-style, layered operation. Intelligence had pinpointed a very specific window at 6 a.m. when volunteer presence around Wangchuk was at its absolute lowest. The goal? A lightning-fast 30-second execution. Step 1. Plainclothes officers, blending in as doctors, would form a visual barrier using white sheets, to stop anyone from recording on their phones. Step 2. Specialized CRPF and RAF units would hold the outer perimeter to manage any remaining crowds. And Step 3. Senior officers stationed right at the exit points would oversee the rapid extraction into a waiting ambulance. Phase 3. The smuggled hospital letter. But as we know, operations rarely go exactly as planned, right? The extraction took over 2 minutes, not 30 seconds, and actually involved some physical scuffles. This police raid and the sudden hospital transfer, it sparked massive suspicion among the public. And this was largely driven by a really crucial medical discrepancy. See, upon arriving at the hospital, medical staff reported that Wangchuk's potassium levels had dropped to a critically dangerous 2.9. That justifies the emergency police intervention. However, Wangchuk's family hotly disputed this. They produced records showing his levels were a totally normal 4.3 just a day prior, and an independent lab test the day after showed a safe 3.5. Now, we are just neutrally reporting both claims here, but you really need to understand why this matters. This disputed data point became the bedrock of public suspicion. The protesters firmly believed the state was weaponizing medical data just to legally clear the protest site. And that suspicion, it reached a boiling point on July 19th. A handwritten note was actually smuggled out of the hospital through Wangchuk's wife and blasted all over social media. He called his presence an illegal detention, and the note urged supporters to view the very next day, July 20th, as India's second freedom movement. He called for a massive march to parliament. This little piece of paper was the ultimate narrative turning point. It's what transformed a static sit-in into an active, massive mobilization.
Moving on to Phase 4, the NEET student wave.
This call to march on July 20th didn't just stay with the original activists. It acted like a lightning rod for pre-existing youth grievances all across the country. And this is really why the Jantar Mantar protests grew to such an unbelievable scale. Through highly organized digital networks, the core protest group managed to orchestrate a staggering 300,000 signups, and they did it using simple Google Forms. The digital campaign was totally relentless, heavily utilizing influencers, memes, and direct video appeals to just draw bodies into New Delhi. But the true fuel to this fire, that was the NEET student demographic. Over 2.3 million students had recently taken the NEET medical exams. And as you probably know, those were notoriously plagued by massive paper leaks, costing families a ton of time and money. These students were already highly frustrated, but more importantly, they possessed deeply entrenched pre-existing campus networks. We're talking student unions and massive WhatsApp groups across major universities that were highly motivated and ready to deploy instantly. And this brilliantly illustrates the technological cat-and-mouse game that instantly kicked off. Anticipating the crowds, authorities deployed heavy mobile signal jammers to disrupt coordination. But the students? They adapted instantly. They just switched over to apps like Briar and BitChat. These apps utilize offline Bluetooth mesh networks. Basically, the denser the crowd, the stronger the connection gets, entirely bypassing the need for cell towers. And when the government actually issued orders to have the code for these apps removed, the tech founders publicly rejected the demands, which, as you can guess, just further fueled the anti-establishment sentiment. And finally, Phase 5, the pressure cooker explodes. So it's the morning of July 20th. The state has layered security all across New Delhi. Tens of thousands of highly motivated, digitally connected protesters are pouring in. And this is where ground logistics and systemic friction finally caused the whole situation to boil over. The very first point of failure was tactical. The police strategy at Jantar Mantar inadvertently created a literal bottleneck. They permitted protesters to enter the site, sure, but they heavily barricaded and sealed all the exit routes to prevent that march on Parliament. So, as the source material points out, the crowd could grow, but it couldn't shrink. A massive, densely packed pressure cooker was physically created right there on the streets and at nearby metro stations. Adding to all this volatility was a really strange anomaly. A truck loaded with stones was found parked near the barricades. Protesters instantly alleged a conspiracy, claiming the police planted the stones to frame them for violence. However, impartial police logs firmly indicate the truck had actually been officially seized in an entirely unrelated case 4 days prior and was just parked there routinely. But honestly, regardless of the truth, in that highly charged atmosphere, just the mere sight of those stones accelerated the paranoia. But the true spark of the explosion, that was a total absence of leadership on the ground. Key organizers were delayed at the hospital. When a remaining organizer on stage announced the start of the march, he actually moved to the back of the stage, completely confusing the crowd. Different factions started moving in completely different directions. Without unified direction, without clear communication, or recognized leaders at the front, what was meant to be an organized march transformed in an instant into a chaotic, uncoordinated surge toward Parliament. And once that momentum started, there was no stopping it. At 11:15 a.m., the first major barricades fall at the SBI building. Just 30 minutes later, at 11:45 a.m., the surging crowd breaks past Patel Chowk. And by 11:54 a.m., a completely out-of-control mass of protesters reaches Kerala House that is just hundreds of meters from Parliament. The police's meticulously planned layers of security completely collapsed in under an hour. The retaliation from the authorities was swift and it was severe. Based directly on the logs from the Parliament Street Station's general diary, we know exactly what the police deployed to regain control of that intersection. They fired 55 rounds of non-electrical shells, 15 rounds of electrical shells, and threw 5 tear gas grenades directly into the dense crowds. This was alongside 2 rounds from anti-riot guns, accompanied by severe lathi charges. The center of New Delhi briefly turned into an actual battle zone. Which leaves us with this final vital question, drawn straight from the heart of our source material. You know, beyond the politics, beyond the organizers, and the police tactics, at the very center of this event were millions of youth with genuine grievances about their futures and compromised exams. When those genuine grievances meet systemic friction, how should a state appropriately respond to prevent a peaceful sit-in from turning into street warfare? I want to thank you for joining me for this explainer today, and I'll leave you to reflect on the true cost of unresolved public frustration. Until next time, keep learning.